If you've heard the name McKinsey, hands. Oh, that's a lot of hands. Yeah, for some reason, we have been hearing that name, that company's name now for quite some time. So I went back and checked.
More lately, though.
In October of last year, we discovered that the provincial government here in Quebec had spent around $6 million, or about $35,000 a day, for strategies on managing the COVID crisis with McKinsey, the company. And this past week, we learned that our federal government has now spent $66 million over the past 6 years under the Liberals, a lot more than the Harper government ever spent before them, for that same advice from that same company. Now there's also, of course, a cry for a Commons committee to look into this, at least from the opposition. So we thought we'd try to find out a little bit more about a company that's in the news a whole lot more, and that is McKinsey. Daniel MARKOVITS is author of The Meritocracy Trap. He's a professor of law at Yale Law School and a founding director of the Yale Center for the Study of Private Law, and he's on the line with us right now. Mr. MARKOVITS, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
I read the article in The Atlantic. I'm going to make you the official authority on McKinsey and let our audience know exactly what this company does and why governments, both provincial and federal, at least in our country, are in bed with them.
Well, first of all, I don't want to claim to be an authority on McKinsey in particular, but management consulting as a whole is a field in which people develop generalized expertise in running things and then assume the control function of other organizations, private companies, governments, and reduce the other people who are working in those organizations to people to be managed and controlled and directed rather than to people who have a say in what it is they do and what their governments or organizations do.
Okay, so that's a good rough description. I will point out the piece you wrote is How McKinsey Destroyed the Middle Class. That's pretty damning right there. Should we be concerned?
I think we should. I think we should be concerned both in the private sector and the public sector. So in the private sector, real quick, look, every company has to do two things. It has to make the goods and services that it provides, and it has to manage itself. And what happened in companies up till, say, 1970, in the United States especially, but also in Canada, is that the company's own workers did both of those things. So they made cars, and they ran how you go about making cars. And that meant that the workers had control over their work, and also they got paid commensurate to the fact that they were running their company. What management consultants do is they separate those tasks and concentrate the management in a narrow group of super elite people who then capture all the economic returns and all the power of running the company and reduce workers to people who are controlled and get paid less. And that's bad in the private sector. In the public sector, in a way, it's even worse. So when a government hires someone like McKinsey to run part of its governing business, it's in a deep way anti-democratic because it thinks that you can replace democratic politics and collective decision about how we should balance values with a technocrat who can simply decide what the optimal thing to do is, and everybody else has to fall in line.
When you say optimal, Are we talking dollars and cents? Is that ultimately the decision that they consider?
So I think in a company, what McKinsey will consider is dollars and cents. In a government, the advice it will give is based on whatever the technocratic objective is that's set. So if you take COVID, it might be health impact or health impact balanced against economic impact. But there's the rub, because the question how you balance our public health against our jobs or against our liberties in the context of a pandemic is a fundamental question of value that we as citizens have to decide how we want to answer. And when a government hires a consultant to answer it, that takes that decision away from us. And that's anti-democratic.
Although my question at that point would be, do we have enough, us, the public, the voters, have enough information to actually be able to make that decision?
Well, I don't think that the opposite of one extreme is the other extreme. So it's the case that we don't know all the things you need to know. There's a place for expertise in politics and in collective decision-making. But expertise should, first of all, focus on means, not ends. And second of all, should be interactive with the public. So what a talented politician does is they translate expertise into a language that the public can engage, and then leads the public to making a collective decision about how it wants to balance basic interests and values. Whereas the management consulting model is to strip the public out of that and have technocrats do more than is legitimate for them to do.
So from complete layman's perspective here, like the way I look at McKinsey and knowing very little about it, I see it as, they're being brought in as consultants to make decisions, to make recommendations so that people can make the decisions. And I feel like there's a built-in assumption that the government's going to make the decisions that are best for all of us. So is the issue here that it's about whose best interests are being put forth in these decision-making processes?
In some cases, it may be whose best interests are being put forth, so that there are certainly credible allegations in the UK in particular, for example, that when McKinsey was brought in to make some of these decisions, it stripped away benefits from, say, healthcare workers and made decisions in a way that benefited elites. But beyond that, whose interests, look, something like COVID is a great example. People needed to work, and they needed their jobs, and people needed to be with their families, and they needed their social lives. But they also needed not to get sick and die. And how you balance your work against your social life, against your health and medical security, is something reasonable people can disagree about. And we need a politics that enables us collectively to balance those out and reach an answer that we can all live with because we have all made it. And if you outsource that decision to a consultant, it doesn't matter how honorable the consultant is. They're going to make a decision that's the one they think best, which is not the same thing as the one that's democratic or legitimate.
Right.
One of the arguments being made here, and I understand it's partly due to try to score political points, but one of the arguments being made by the opposition here on this McKinsey story federally is the fact that, hey, we have public servants, we're paying them, they're elected officials, they should be the ones making these calls, making these decisions. Is that a valid argument?
I think it's valid in two senses. First of all, they're accountable, and so they shouldn't hide behind subcontractors effectively. But second of all, and this is almost more important, if you're in a company, and especially if you're in a government, it may be that you want the people who make those decisions to be also the people who live their lives in the company or in the society. And one thing that happens when you outsource this is you also downskill your own internal capacity. So as governments rely on McKinsey more and more, they turn out to have fewer civil servants and less expertise in their civil service. And so, yes, in some sense, you have the technocrats who should be making these decisions. But what happens is when you rely on McKinsey, you have fewer and fewer of them until you're actually unable to make the decisions internally because all of the capacity and the skill has been outsourced to a private company.
Whoa, okay, so then...
Are you getting the horror movie aspect of this yet?
I certainly am. And so now that we're in bed with McKinsey, privately and publicly, it seems like the damage has been done. What do we do now? How do we get out of bed? I mean, it's not just simply...
Can you extricate yourself from this? I mean, is that even doable?
Yeah, I think it's doable. It requires a certain kind of politics and a certain kind of political leadership. One of the ways to understand the populist uprisings that we've seen throughout the rich nations of the world is as disgruntled and unhappy populations saying, we don't want to be governed by people who are alien to us, who are experts above us and tell us what to do. And in a dark way, what leaders do is they turn that to an authoritarianism, to a hatred of the other, to a nativism, to a discriminatory motive. And what a skilled political leader does, and a virtuous political leader, is they take that energy and they say, look, we should be governing ourselves, but it's hard work, and it requires a politics in which we talk to each other across disagreements, in which we realize that you don't always win, but sometimes when you lose, the other side has legitimate claim to govern you, and together we reconstitute our democracy in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-class democracy that takes back our own control from not just politicians but also these kinds of technocratic corporate entities.
Mr. MARKOVITS, I know you have to go. We want to thank you so much for your time and your insight. I hope we can chat again because we certainly didn't have enough time to get through as much as we wanted to. But thank you so much. We do appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure, and I am sorry this has been so short, too. And thank you for having me, and thank you to your listeners for listening.
We will have you back. Daniel MARKOVITS, author of The Meritocracy Trap, talking all about McKinsey. Again, that title of that article, if you want to read it, because you're hearing a lot more about McKinsey, is McKinsey, and the destruction of the middle class.
My mind is kind
Wow.
of blown right now.
Pretty amazing stuff.